Hi, everybody. I want to share with you something that I just read that I just thought was amazing. And it's written really clearly, and it's about, when Jesus wrote in the dust and the Feast of the Tabernacle, and it gives history and that sort of thing about the feast. And I thought I would like to share it with you. Now, I give all credence to a gentleman. His name is John Fenn, and I will leave a link below to his website. He's a great teacher. He's a wonderful and very good person. So, um, gosh, I feel guilty like reading it, but it's in script, not in video. so, um, so he talks about the John 7 details the events during the Feast of the Tabernacles, which is in the last of the 7 biblical festivals given by God to Moses, and is the only one annually celebrated in the millennium as per Zechariah 14:16 through 19, which says, in the end, the enemies of Jerusalem who survived the plague will go up to Jerusalem each year to worship the King, the Lord of Heaven's armies, and to celebrate the Festival of Shelters, or Feast of Tabernacle. Any nation in the world that refuses to come to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of Heaven's armies, will have no rain. If the people of Egypt refuse to attend the festival, the Lord will punish them with the same plague that he sends other nations who refuse to go. Um, so, anyway, here just, okay. So, it's also called the Feast of the Living Waters because Zechariah in 14:8 and Ezekiel 49 describe living waters flowing from Jerusalem in that day. So I'm going to go to Zechariah 14:8, and it says, "On that day, life-giving waters will flow out from Jerusalem, half toward the Dead Sea and half toward the Mediterranean, flowing continuously in both summer and winter." That's kind of cool, huh? Um, So it becomes like fresh water, only with the marshy areas left briny, he says. So Jesus wrote in the sand, and if you remember when he was writing in the sand, it was where people were accusing this woman of committing adultery, and everyone was getting ready to stone her. And he said, "Those without sin pick up the stone," and they all dropped the stone and walked away. And of course, Jesus could have thrown the stone, but he chose not to, and gave her mercy. But during that time, it was during the Feast of the Tabernacles, and it lasts a whole week. So the priests at that time would cut willow branches 20 feet long or more and space themselves that far apart. And they march in unison, swinging together the branches left and right, simulating the sound of the Ruach, which is the breath of God in Hebrew, the Spirit, as they entered the city. You can imagine, you know, them waving those branches, which when I read that, it reminded me of when Jesus came into Jerusalem before he was crucified and everyone was waving palm branches. And at the same time this is going on, the high priest and the assistant priest would leave the temple via the water gate to the pool of Solomon and to collect water in a large gold pitcher. So the water was called the Mayim Hayim, which means living water. Or Maim, sorry, I read that wrong. That's Hebrew. The assistant would have a silver pitcher full of wine. These two groups, the priests with the willow branches and the high priest and assistant, would approach the altar at the time the other priests were placing the animal on the shelter. So interesting. Gold always represents God and purity in the Old Testament, and silver represents righteousness. Thus one gold containing living water, and the other one silver containing wine, which is a type of blood. So all three groups converge to the altar, with the willow branches being placed over the altar to form a sequoia tent. So that's how they make the Feast of Tabernacles, okay? And the high priest and assistant pouring out the water and the wine on the sacrifice. Amazing, right? Because when Jesus was sacrificed, when they pierced him, what came out? Water off there. At this time, the people saying, Isaiah 12:3, therefore with joy you will draw out waters from the well of salvation. And the Hebrew word for salvation is Yeshua. This was done daily for the entire week. So with all this going on, John 7:37-9 says, on the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood up and said in a loud voice, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures say, rivers of living water will flow from them. By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him would later receive. Up to that time, remember, the Spirit had not been given to anyone, except the prophets and all that sort of thing, because Jesus had not yet died and was resurrected. So Tabernacles was also called the Feast of Dedication. I'm sorry. Because it was during this feast that celebrates God's living among men that Solomon dedicated his temple. So you'll understand why Solomon's dedication, when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into the temple for God to live among men, and that his glory and presence was such that no one could stand upright, which is in 1 Kings 8:11. So 1 Kings 8:11 says, the priests could not continue their service because of the cloud, for the glorious presence of the Lord filled the temple of the Lord. So, because the practice was to place 4 large lamps in the midst of the temple area during this festival, it was also known as a Feast of Lights, as God is the light of the world, which explains something else. And this is just so awesome. So the day after the main feast, which is still part of the feast, actually is called, Shemini Israel, the 8th day. Oh, okay. In Jesus' time, the 8th day was also called Shimchat Torah, which means rejoicing in the Torah, which is the word, right, in Hebrew. Today they are celebrated one day after the other, but in Jesus' time, both were on day 8. The number 8 in Scripture is the number of new beginnings based on the creation week. So in this setting, John 8:1 says, the 8th day, this day of celebrating the word, this day of new beginnings, that this woman caught in the act of adultery is made to stand face to face with Jesus. But Jesus took his finger and wrote on the ground. And John Fenn says it's significant because in Exodus 31:18 and then repeated in Deuteronomy 9:10, both say the 10 Commandments. The Torah, the word, were engraved on stone by the finger of God. Additionally, for every day during the Feast of Tabernacles, the passage from Jeremiah 17:12-13 would be read by these very leaders. So Jeremiah, and it says, Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will have their names written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord, the foundation, or the fountain of living waters. Amazing, huh? Look at all that shadowing and foreshadowing of the Feast of the Tabernacles. Jesus, alive at that time, was in Jerusalem, wrote in the sand, and John Fenn, he puts here, my guess was Jesus was writing their names in the dust according to this passage. But we won't know, right? But it's just they're foreshadowing. And so the Feast of the Tabernacles is one of those things that we're still supposed to celebrate today, which I think would be really fun. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. It was awesome. God bless.